So in this video, I'm going to go through 8 tips that I think will really help you shoot panoramas when you're working out in the field. As a bonus, at the end of this video, I'm going to go through a very quick edit and show you the stages which I go through and why these tips are important. Now, you could spend a lot of money. You could go out and buy some really quite fancy panoramic heads and software to help you in this process. But I'm here to tell you that you do not have to do that. To get successful panoramic landscape photographs, you can use the tripod that you've got right now and the camera equipment that you've got right now. And that's where these tips are going to come in. Not only are they going to save you money, they're going to improve your photography. So let's get on to the first tip. So once you've decided on your composition, you've got to think about leveling your tripod. Now, I'm not going to go into panoramic composition in this video, but I have got videos on my website that talk about composition as well. So if you want to go and view those, I'll put some links up to these other videos. But basically, the first thing you need to do is level the tripod. If your camera isn't level and the tripod isn't level, then when you pan the camera around, you're going to have a very, very wonky horizon. And the problem with that is when you stitch it together, you're going to have to make the decision of what to crop, and you're not going to have a lot of frame left to look at. Let me show you why you must level the tripod. The camera can be level on the head as it is here now. It's fairly good. But as I pan the camera around, it points downhill over here, and up over this side, it's pointing uphill. So effectively, our horizon is going to be like this. And then when we try and sort all that out, it won't work. So you can't just level the camera. You need to level the tripod. So let me show you how I do that. We'll get rid of the camera first. So down on the tripod down here, there's a little bubble, a little spirit level. If you haven't got one of these, then you can buy them. They're really quite cheap. In fact, I'm thinking of getting a bigger one to put on the top of my tripod here, so I can just see it a bit easier than this one. But that's something that you can do. The first thing I do, obviously, is have a look at roughly what way I want to move it. And I do that by lifting the tripod up. And you're going to have to do this, unless you've got a bowl head for leveling and doing panoramics, you're going to have to do this by using by moving individual legs. And you can do that. And when you get it about right, you just literally clip it in place, and that's roughly where you are. Now, you might find after you've done that you need to adjust your composition a little bit, but you probably won't need to. And then it's just a case of putting the camera back on, re-leveling the camera back up. And a lot of cameras have got spirit levels on them. If they haven't, then all you've got to do is use a hot shoe spirit level. So there we are with the camera reasonably level. And now if we pan it around, we can see that basically the camera is almost flat throughout the entire rotation. And that's going to give us a really good level picture when we come to stitch them together. So let's get into tip 2. So the second tip that I want to talk about is focusing. If you can imagine, if you're out in the field and you're using autofocus, every time you take one of these compositions, the lens is going to refocus and take a slightly different focus point each time. Maybe you've got foreground in one picture, and then as you pan around, you lose that foreground, you've got the background. You're going to have a sharp foreground, a sharp background, and when you stitch these individual images together, you're going to get a lot of different strange effects when they come to put it together, because the computer will have different focal points all throughout the scene, and it's just not going to work. So you need to have control of your camera. You need to be able to use manual focus. So if you switch your camera from autofocus into manual focus, it's quite easy to do it. And then you just need to try and work out what you're going to focus on. Now, what I would use as a rough guide for anybody who's just starting out with this is focus on what is important in the subject. What's the most important part for you? And then if you go for an aperture in the region of, say, f8, f11, maybe even higher, f16, you can always bracket and do a number of these pans and pick the best one when you stitch them together. You're going to get a good in sharp panoramic when you finish the process. And another little tip to add on to this one as well, which I guess makes it 9 tips really, is to make sure that as you're using a tripod, that your image stabilizer is off. Now some lenses, some cameras will work with them switched on. It's smart enough to do that now. But just to be on the safe side, good practice to switch it off. Otherwise, the stabilization within the lens or the camera body expects to see movement, and it will move everything slightly itself, and you'll get blurred pictures. It won't be down to your focusing. Okay, so once we've actually sorted out the focusing and the level of the tripod, we need to start thinking about our exposure. Now, exposure with panoramic photography can be really quite difficult. And the reason sometimes it works out really badly is because if you're working on something over here and then something over here, depending on where the sun comes up and where the light is, you can have a really bright area and you can also have a really dark area. So that can cause a lot of issues as well. Now your camera, when it's set in any kind of the auto exposure modes, is going to try and compensate for that and bring everything back to a mid-level. Now normally that's fine. If we're just taking one picture with one exposure and we're not going to stitch anything together, then it's not really going to be an issue. But when you start putting multiple frames together and the camera is adjusted for every single one and you stitch them together, you're going to get a very strange look. It's not going to be exactly right. So the other thing you need to do is you need to take your camera off the automatic modes or the program modes or whatever you're on and put it on manual exposure. I wouldn't even leave it on AV or TV. That's aperture priority or shutter priority. Go for full manual control, because that way you get to set the exposure how you want it, and it's the same throughout the entire frame. Now once again, it's digital photography we're talking about here. Once you've got the memory cards and the camera equipment, it's cheap. So fill those cards up. If you want to take a set of panoramic images to stitch at one exposure and then do some above and under expose as well, then you can do that. There's no rules here on how many images you take to get the exposure right. But what's important is you do each sequence in manual. Okay, so think about it. If you can't match it, you can't stitch it. So what do I mean? Well, for tip 5, we need to think about how we're actually going to move our camera and what we're going to include in each frame. Now you need to make sure you've got a decent overlap, and all common sense and everything else I've seen online kind of says you need about 1/3 of that frame. Now that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is similar to what I do. I go for 1/3 of the frame, but I also look for significant parts of the image. So if I've got a rock or a boulder or a tree or a top of a mountain or a tor or a house or a building, whatever it might be, I'm looking for significant elements in each frame as well. So sometimes I will take more, sometimes I'll take less. But basically, I'll move the camera, take a picture, move it again, and I'll take a marker in the last frame and go, I'm not going to go beyond that point. And that might be to include a tree or, like I said, a rock or a boulder. So I'll move it again, take the next picture, do the same again, next picture, do the same again, and the same again. And I'll do that and I've taken the full range. When you get your pictures back into Lightroom, what you're going to have is sometimes hundreds of images to look at on a card. It becomes difficult to decide where one set of panoramics begins and another one ends. So this tip is really quite important. It doesn't seem like it when you're out in the field, but when you actually get home, you'll be really glad that you did it. So something I do before every picture, every set, I'll put my hand in front of the lens and just take a picture. And that way I know when I've got a black screen or a picture of my hand, that's where one set of images start. And after I've taken my panoramic, I'll do the same at the other end, and I know that that's where that set ends. And then if I'm going to do a different exposure, maybe the same again, maybe even the same panoramic, but with a different exposure or different focusing or whatever it's going to be, exactly the same again. And at least that way I know when I've got them up in Lightroom, I can see a strip of images that all belong together. We need to get into the habit of shooting raw. And the reason we need to do that is because when you get your images into Lightroom and you want to start doing your editing, you want that full dynamic range, you want that full information that is on the file that you can work with. It gives you the ability to control exposure, to deal with the shadows and the highlights and the color temperature and you can do so much more. If the camera's already recorded it as a JPEG and thrown some of that information away, it's gone forever. And it's really important with panoramics because, like we said earlier on, you might be shooting with really extremes of exposure, the really bright side of the frame and the dark side of the frame. And you'd need that available information in the file so you can make those corrections. And software like Lightroom, it's going to allow you to do your stitches in RAW anyway. So do yourself a favour, put your camera on RAW and make full use of what your camera's capable of. So tip 8 is one real big bonus. It's the software stitch. And this is where you realise that all the tips that we've gone through already actually count and make a difference. Put my hand in front for the first frame. It just enables me to know when I start editing where the first shot is and where the last one is. So that's my marker shot. So one, I always take a shot at the end, one at the beginning, because when you tend to crop, you know, you sort of need to know that you've got everything in. Okay, it's 2. The 9, there we go. And once again at the end on the last picture as well, once again put my hand in front and we'll just shoot that one. There we go. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pop over to the computer. We're going to go through the stages of stitching an image together very, very quickly, and then we're going to show you the final image. So come on, let's get on that computer. Coffee, that's better. Okay, so here we are right inside Lightroom straight away. So what I'm going to do in a minute, I'm going to share the screen with you and I'm going to open up my Lightroom panel that I've got in front of me. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through some of the things which relate to the tips I've already previously shown you. This isn't really designed to be an editing video as such, it's just a quick run through of the steps that I take, and at the end we'll output a final image so you can just see the final result. So let's not wait around, let's go straight into the Lightroom panel. So nothing special about Lightroom that we've got in front of us, it's a standard setup. Now what I have done is, if you sort of like have a look at the screen, you can see here, for example, and here, that's the images which we're going to select. So I've already had a look at them, understand what we're going to do. But the point that I want to show you is that when you come in and look at this screen, there are loads and loads of pictures in it, and it's very difficult to determine which ones you want to use and which ones you don't. But if we go back to the beginning and think about where we actually used our hand in the frame to divide up the images, you can see on this frame here, look, and also on this frame here, which I'm going to colour in red for you, you can see that these here have both got my hand mark in them. So those images there, I know that everything between those two are the ones which we're going to stitch together. So we can just do that by going, click on the first one, holding down the shift button, and then clicking on the last one. That selects the images that we're going to use on this stitch. And you'll notice that I've got extra frames at either end, which I may or may not include in the stitch, but actually it's going to allow me to sort of give me some cropping room, which is what we talked about as well. So we've selected all of those. And then it's very easy. We go up to Photo, Photo Merge, to Panorama. And then it's going to bring up another menu, which allows us to join these together. Now what we're going to do, we're going to turn off, if we turn off the auto crop for now, then you'll see this white area around the outside of the frame. And in fact, for this picture, it's really, really quite good. I've seen things come out a lot worse than this. The white areas are the bits which, when the computer software is trying to join the images together, it can't fill these bits in because of distortion, because of misalignment issues, or whatever it may be. So these are the things which are really important, because when we set our camera up out in the field and we made sure we had our tails, we made sure we had our tripod level, that's what made all the difference. So getting everything level and sorted out at that stage minimizes that area. So there's other ways you can fill the edges. You can use something called boundary warp, and it'll fill the edges in for us as well. And you'll see that it's done a reasonably good job. Looks quite good actually. I generally don't use it because sometimes it'll sort of create a bit of distortion and things don't look exactly right. So generally I'll just use the auto crop and let it fill that in. Auto settings will automatically adjust exposure, contrast, brightness and those levels. Sometimes you may want to use it, I never do. Create stack basically just puts the images into a stack when you look at it again in Photoshop, sorry, inside of Lightroom. And for the actual projection methods, spherical is exactly what it says. It unfolds or folds the images around a sphere. Perspective, I don't really ever use it, never had a use for it. And cylindrical is what we use, is where it basically wraps the images around a cylinder. So it imagines it unwraps those into a flat plane. And that's what we're going to be using. So then all we do is click on merge. Okay, so finally Photoshop and Lightroom have done their thing and we have the merged image. Now if you remember, we had 2 marker frames which I'd highlighted in red and a stack of 9 images in between them. So we've now got 2 marker frames. The 9 images are actually stacked one on top of the other inside of the screen, so just to make it easier to look at. But it says 10 and the 10th image is our final output. So if we just click on that now and then go to develop, it'll bring the final picture up. So there we have it, our final panoramic image all put together for us. And to be honest, I'm really pleased with that. It's got very little editing to do to bring out the details and everything that I wanted to capture in the frame. And it's got a little bit of room to round it to crop the sides down a bit more if I so choose. So I hope from this video that what you've got from it is that if you do a little bit of work out in the frame and follow those in the field, and follow those tips, you're not going to end up with a difficult edit when you get back to the computer. And that's what it's all about. It's about following some basic rules, putting some basic things in place, and then you'll get a more successful result when you come to edit your images. If you found this video interesting, if you found it useful in any way whatsoever, then please give it a thumbs up. And I'd love it if you comment as well. Maybe there's some more tips you can add to it yourself. And I like the community to get involved, so please feel free to do that. And please, if you enjoy the content on this channel, then consider subscribing. And if you do subscribe, hit that bell icon, because then you'll get notifications of my new videos. So that's all from me for this week, and I hope to see you really soon. I'm going to put the final picture up now for you to look at. And until then, hope you enjoy your photography, and see you next week.